Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Duff. I'm the state senator here from Norwalk and represent Norwalk and Darien up in Hartford and Senator Gordon. Thank you. Welcome to Norwalk High School. As you can see, there are lots of things here for candlelight. There are lots of things here for candlelight. In the next couple weeks, we invite you to come back on December 17th, 18th, and 19th. Start that again. How's that? Better? Okay, thank you. My name is Bob Duff. I'm the state senator from Norwalk and Darien. We are so glad you're here at Norwalk High School. We invite you to come back on the 17th, 18th, and 19th for Candlelight, which is the oldest concert for this since World War II. They've been having it, so it's beautiful and wonderful, and I want to give a plug for that. My son's in it, so I have to do this. So we're here today to talk about the tax bill, the GOP tax bill that is making its way through the halls of Congress right now, actually in secret, I think. Senator Murphy is here today to talk a little bit more about it and has a slideshow and is going to walk us through some of the ins and outs of it. I have to say that I am so proud of Senator Murphy on so many levels. He and I served in the state Senate together before we moved on to Congress, and now as a U.S. Senator. But isn't he doing a great job? He is fighting for so many issues that we care about, whether it's sensible gun control, whether it's the tax bill, whether it's so many other issues, day in and day out, standing up to the president, whatever the issue is, he's out there fighting, and whether people agree or disagree with him, they know that he's out there day in and day out working really hard for us. I have to say one thing about this tax bill, because there are some real ramifications to this bill, which is why it is so important that you are all out here. You are out here and you help us to resist some of the things that are happening in Washington, and that is so important. Your work, your presence, your visibility, your phone calls, your emails are extremely, extremely important. And I have to tell you, as a state senator, I'm also a realtor because we have a part-time legislature. But I can tell you the real-world implications of this bill, not even passed yet, is that I already had a client, two young people who are married. I married them last year, getting ready to start out with their life, buying their first house. They told me, you know what? We're holding off because we're not sure what's going to happen with this tax bill. So here you have two young people who want to purchase a property, who want to start their lives off, hopefully have a family at some point, and they've said, you know what, we've got to stop because we don't know what's happening down in Washington right now with this crazy tax bill. So that's really what's happening. So with that, I wanted to introduce my friend, our great senator, Chris Murphy.
Thank you, Bob. Let me just repay the compliment in kind. Bob has been a great friend and a colleague for a long time. You've got a fantastic delegation here in Norwalk. It's not easy being up in Hartford these days, but Bob is somebody who is just uniquely in touch with his constituents. If you're not a follower of his Twitter feed, he will tell you everything from the latest updates on legislation in Hartford to which is the best exit to get onto 95 in the morning. He is a full-service communicator, and so I hope that you pay attention to him and the great service that he does here. I want to thank my staff for putting all these really great decorations up for this town hall. That's a little something extra today. But we have some really serious business to get to. We don't have a lot of time. I have a bunch of events today. I'm traveling all over the state, and I wanted to make sure to have a portion of my day dedicated to getting the word out about this disastrous tax bill. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of info up front and then turn it over to you for some questions. We have a lot of business to get to between now and the end of the year. The most pressing is the Republicans' desire to pass this very backwards tax bill, but we also have a government shutdown pending in 2 weeks. We have the children's health care insurance program that has already expired. Families in Connecticut have gotten notices that their kids are going to lose access to the CHIP program if we don't fund it. We obviously have the crisis of the Dreamers who need permanent protection by the end of this year, and then we also have health centers that are running out of funding if we don't reauthorize by the end of 2017. So we have an awful lot of planes to land by the end of the year, which is really difficult to imagine how that will happen, given that throughout 2017, the Republicans have yet to land one single plane legislatively, and we have a lot of work that has to be done. Let me thank you for being here, and let me thank you for being such passionate advocates over the course of this year. We have been successful in stopping the repeal of the health care bill, stopping funding for the border wall, thus far stopping passage of this trickle-down tax bill, because people have been standing up in just unprecedented ways this year, not just across this state, but across this country. New organizations forming, people finding their voice, town halls being filled to capacity, our phone lines ringing off the hook. This has been a wonderful exercise in civic participation, and I'm a better advocate for you because of it. I know your lives are so unbelievably busy. I want to thank you for standing up in the way that you have. Let me walk you through where we are on this tax bill for a few minutes, and then I'll open this up to questions. Before I go into the details, let me tell you why we are, and we're going to sort of dim the light so you can see this. Let me tell you why we are where we are. This bill makes absolutely no economic sense. It makes absolutely no policy sense. And there is a reason for it. Republicans found out how difficult it is to pass really unpopular legislation. When they told the country that they were going to repeal the Affordable Care Act, found out that nobody wanted them to do it, and then they magically couldn't come up with the votes. So they came up with a new scheme on this tax bill. Instead of trying to put together a policy document that could get 50 votes in the United States Senate, they decided to put together a political document that could get 50 votes. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that this bill is constructed to do one thing and one thing only. Maybe that's a little bit too simple. It's constructed to do one thing primarily, which is to shift money from states that are represented by Democrats and deliver that to states that are represented by Republicans. It is not national tax policy. It is simply a transfer of money from states represented by Democrats to states represented by Republicans. Now they're doing that because they figured that was the easiest way to get 50 votes, is to just move money from from states representing 49 votes to states representing 51 votes. And so as you sort of try to figure out why they're doing this, given the fact that it doesn't really match up with a lot of the things that Republicans have said about tax policy or budget policy or economics, view it through that lens instead. Evidence of that is this is a party that has talked about controlling deficits and debt for decades, and yet this bill will result in about $1.5 to $2.2 trillion worth of new debt. The reason for that, it is not a policy document. It is a document designed to simply get votes. So, where am I pointing this to? To get this to work. Sure it's not. Here. In the back? Projector's back there. All right. It was working earlier? Yeah, it does. All right. This may not work. There we go. All right. Where did you point it to make that work? Okay. Here we go. So let's talk about first where the benefit and detriment of this bill is going. The Tax Policy Center, which is a nonpartisan analyst shop, estimates that the plan is going to raise taxes on 13 million middle-class households earning less than $200,000 in 2019. So that's immediately, this bill is going to result in a pretty massive tax increase for 13 million middle-class households. Here in Connecticut, the percentage of households will be even bigger. Why? The main reason is that though there is an increase in the standard deduction in this bill, if you itemize because you are paying big local and state taxes or you have a big mortgage, you are losing under this bill. Because the legislation, and remember there's two versions of it now in the House and the Senate, but by varying degrees, the bill takes away your ability to deduct your mortgage interest and takes away your ability to deduct state and local property taxes. So that means that for people that itemize, pretty quickly taxes are going to go up. In Connecticut, 40% of tax households itemize. Now that's a much higher percentage than other places. And so those households are likely going to have their taxes go up. Now, at the last minute in the Senate, they added a $10,000 exclusion. So you could still deduct $10,000 worth of property taxes. But in Connecticut, the bigger benefit is the state income tax deduction, not the property tax deduction. And the average household in Connecticut that is itemizing $20,000 of state and local tax obligations. So even $10,000 still means there's a tax increase on you. But in 2027, 6 out of 10 middle-class families all across the country are going to see a tax hike. Why? It's because in this bill, the corporate tax cuts are permanent. They last the whole 10 years. The inheritance tax cuts in this bill that apply to only 5,000 families in the entire country, they are permanent. But the middle class tax cuts are temporary. They go away after only 7 years. So in 2027, which is at the end of the 10-year period of time, the majority of middle class families get a tax increase. Now why is that? The reason is that at the outset, they gave themselves permission under what's called reconciliation rules to run up $1.5 trillion worth of debt. And they had to find a way to stay under $1.5 trillion worth of debt. Amazing that Republicans would be so interested in racking up $1.5 trillion of debt, but that was the self-restraint that they showed, $1.5 trillion. And so they had to make a decision. To do that, they had to make either the corporate and inheritance tax cuts temporary or the middle class tax cuts temporary. Guess which ones they chose? They chose the middle class tax cuts. That means in year 7, even if you're taking the standard deduction and got a bump, it goes away. Meanwhile, 83% of people making more than $900,000 will see an average tax cut of $42,000, in large part because the top rates do go down under this bill. So those people will see a permanent decrease in their taxes. It's not working again. Nope, there we go. Here's how it hits Connecticut. I sort of talked about most of this already. So it's eliminating state and local tax deduction. 41% of our filers use that deduction. And again, the result of all of this is that by eliminating the state and local tax deduction, you're going to pressure state governments to trim further investments in public schools and other programs, because there's then going to be a corresponding pressure on states to reduce those taxes because you're not getting the benefit for them at the federal level. And of course, by running up $1.5 trillion of debt, there's going to be a corresponding pressure on the federal government to reduce expenditures to states as well. Specific hurt on homeowners here. You're talking about an ability being taken away to defray property taxes, so you're looking at increases on Connecticut homeowners with incomes between $50,000 and $200,000 by an average of $800. So if you make below $50,000 in the state, you may, for the first 7 years, come away with a relatively small tax cut if you don't own a home. But if you're making between $50,000 and $200,000, you're seeing your taxes go up. Again, that's devastating for the state. As we try to recruit more businesses to come here, as we try to convince more headquarters to locate in Connecticut, those jobs, which are normally in that $50,000 to $200,000 range, are not going to be interested in coming to a state where you're going to have your taxes go up. As Bob said, what will happen here is that home values will go down. The estimates are that home values could decrease by 10% if you are not able to defray the cost of your property taxes. Now, the House version of this bill has this very strange provision in which it says that we're going to take away your ability to deduct mortgage interest on the value of a home above $500,000. Again, we got a lot of those homes here in Connecticut. 100,000 houses in Connecticut are valued over $550,000. But it says that that won't apply to your existing house. So just think about how that works. So if you're in a house that's over $500,000, and if you move to another house that's that value, you're going to lose your mortgage interest deduction. But if you stay in your existing house, you'll get to keep it. You will never move. And that has a just cascading effect on Connecticut's real estate market if all of a sudden houses that are priced over $500,000 never are sold. Then you effectively eliminate real estate mobility, which again is critical to people being able to come in and out of this state. Where do the benefits go? The benefits all go to the top 1%. So again, the Tax Policy Center estimates that 80% of the tax benefits in this bill go to the top 1% of income earners because of the inheritance tax cut, because the middle class tax cuts go away, and because the rates come down for upper income earners. And because of this very interesting provision, which lowers the rate of taxation for what we call pass-through incomes. So if you are a business owner and you take your income, you don't pay corporate taxes or business taxes, but you take all of the profit for your business directly as your income, you pay normal income tax rates on that. Both of these bills change that treatment. And you will now, if you are a business owner, and take your business income as personal income, you will pay a much lower tax rate on that income. Now the argument that Republicans make is that if we're reducing the corporate tax rate, we have to do that as well to be fair to small business owners. The problem is this is going to be a boon to tax lawyers, and everybody is going to figure out how to turn their business into a pass-through entity so that they can take income that used to be salary income and now take it as pass-through income and ultimately pay much lower taxes on it. Here's just another way of looking at how the top 1% of taxpayers in Connecticut are going to receive the bulk of the benefit of this bill. As a result of this deficit spending, existing law requires you to automatically offset that deficit increase with cuts in Medicare and Medicaid. So this tax increase will result in automatic cuts to Medicare of $473 billion and to Medicaid by $1 trillion. That is all in order to pay for the cuts to the top 1%. So massive cuts in Medicare and Medicaid in order to pay for those tax cuts. I should just give up on this. All right. Here's the deficit. I mentioned it before. Blows a $1.5 trillion hole in the deficit. And it's likely that the Congress is going to use this as a means to just argue for further cuts later on down the line to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. All right, and I'm just going to mention one more thing, and I'm going to give up on this slide presentation. This is also a health care bill. Included in this bill is a repeal of the individual mandate. What that means is that the ACA, which now has a requirement that you buy insurance or face a penalty, that provision will be removed. Why that's important is because every healthcare economist will tell you, you cannot protect people against discrimination because of illness if you don't also require healthy people to buy insurance. The reason for that is this. If you tell insurance companies that they can't price people differently based upon their diagnosis or their medical acuity, but you don't require people who are healthy to buy insurance, then a rational healthy person will not buy insurance until they're sick, right? Why buy insurance when you're healthy if it won't cost you any more to do so until you get sick? And so insurance economists have told you that you can't protect people from pre-existing condition discrimination unless you require healthy people to buy insurance. And so Republicans in this bill don't remove the pre-existing condition protection, but they do remove the requirement to buy insurance. And what the CBO says is that that will increase premiums every year by 10%, compounding. That means that by year 7 of the bill, premiums will be doubled, just by virtue of that one change in healthcare law. Now that's an important moment, because as I mentioned before, year 7 is also where the middle class tax cuts go away. So think about the average $50,000 income earner in this country. 7 years from now under this bill, their middle class tax cut will be gone, and they will have their premiums doubled. Meanwhile, corporations will still be paying radically lower taxes, and the 5,000 families that still pay the inheritance tax will no longer have to pay it. We should do tax reform. Our tax system is wildly unfair. It's way too complicated, but this isn't the way to do it. This isn't the means by which we should be reforming taxes. 80% of the benefit going to the top 1%. The middle class getting relief for a little while, but corporations and very, very rich families getting permanent tax relief. We shouldn't be hiding healthcare reform that they couldn't get passed on their own inside a tax bill, resulting in premiums going up for everybody. My hope is that what happened on healthcare reform happens here. After a healthcare reform failed, Republicans and Democrats got together. The health committee that I sit on sat down and negotiated over the course of about a month a bipartisan healthcare reform bill that, if it was ever passed, would have the effect of at least temporarily stabilizing our healthcare exchanges all across the country. We showed, as Democrats, that we were willing to sit down and negotiate, compromise, give on things that we cared about in order to try to pass something in a bipartisan way. And I'm sincere about doing the same thing on taxes. I'm willing to compromise on some of my beliefs with Republicans to try to find a better tax system if they give up on this partisan approach. Bob is right, we didn't see this bill. This was all negotiated behind closed doors. There weren't public hearings. Now it's out there for people to see, but once again, the intention is to rush this through. And if you don't think this is a good idea, like I don't think this is a good idea, as Senator Blumenthal doesn't think it's a good idea, as Jim Himes doesn't think it's a good idea, then we do need you to once again raise your voice in any way possible, not just through us, but with friends who live in states represented by members who could be influential on this. This bill could be disastrous for our state. It's unfortunately, frankly, designed to be disastrous for our state. And yet we still have time. We still have time before this comes for final passage to draw a line in the sand. I wanted to give you some of the details about this, give you a little bit of the data, give you some of the numbers so that you can use this in arguments with your friends, that you can use this to advocate both here and around the country. We've been, I think, remarkably successful in stopping this really hurtful agenda from passing, but this is decision time between now and the end of the year on this tax bill, and I wanted to give you a little bit of that information, get a little bit of your feedback, and ask you to go out there and do what you can to help me and Dick and Jim to stop it before it becomes law. So I stole the microphone that was designed for questions, so why don't I give you that one. And I'm going to ask if people have comments or questions, hopefully questions and hopefully short ones, to come up and ask them at the microphone, and I will seek to answer them as quickly as I can. So you want to, does that fit in there or does it not really fit in there? Yeah, that one. Here, you want to switch? All right, they tell me if I just hold it here, I'll be okay. All right, go ahead. Well, introduce yourself and fire away.
I'm Jeffrey Stewart. I live in Greenwich. I'm here with Indivisible. And I was going to start out by saying how horrible this tax bill is, but I guess I don't have to say that anymore. I will say that I think it's misnamed. It's a misnomer to call it a tax bill. It's really a massive wealth giveaway or transfer from all of us to the very rich. I think that summarizes it. But anyway, what we would like to ask you to do is pledge to do everything in your power to delay, resist, and block the tax bill, including, well, the tax bill and then every other destructive piece of legislation in the agenda of Congress and our current administration, and to use every method that you have available, including filibuster and withholding consent when there is a request for unanimous consent. The longer we delay this, the greater the probability that it will die the same way the healthcare bill did.
Chip, thank you for the answer to that is yes, we're going to use everything in our power to stop this bill from becoming law. This is a very this is a very important moment because we have things that we actually need to get done. So there are these pressing matters. I mentioned them: the Children's Healthcare Insurance Program, protection for the Dreamers, that have to be done because there are deadlines. Funding has expired. Kids are being deported. They are losing their eligibility. There is no deadline on this healthcare bill. Republicans have manufactured an urgency around this, and so we are trying to convince them to use the next 2 weeks to make sure that a budget is passed, to make sure that kids still have health care, et cetera, and then go back to the drawing board on this bill. Clearly, your members are not happy with it. The American public hates the bill. Go back to the drawing board over the holiday, come back and do it next year. Use the time between now and December to get the must-pass things done. So that's what we're trying to say with that.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, back and forth. Yep.
Hi, I'm William, and I'm from Greenwich, Connecticut. And I came with I totally support opposing the tax bill, but I came with a foreign policy question.
Sure.
So for people who first I'd like to thank you for your opposition to the Saudi arms sales and Saudi supporting arms sales. You've been like one of the only senators to speak out, and I greatly appreciate you speaking out against just the completely insane Saudi war crimes they've committed. They've targeted schools, hospitals, markets, and they've done this all with U.S. support, as you said. You had that very powerful speech on the Senate floor a few weeks ago, and you've also co-sponsored multiple bills, which I greatly appreciate. And so now the Saudis have cut off access to ports and cut off food from coming into the country. So I was wondering if you feel that there would be support in Congress for another bill to sponsor to cut off U.S. arms sales.
So this is all related to a war inside Yemen that the Saudis are perpetuating, fighting against who are sponsored by the Iranians. The United States is facilitating that bombing campaign. We provide the munitions, we provide the targeting help, we provide the mid-air refueling. I am the most vocal opponent of U.S. participation in that campaign in the Congress. I've brought, as was mentioned, 2 privileged resolutions, meaning they have to get votes before the Senate, one in 2016, one in 2017, to stop arms sales. They are the only way that you can get a vote in the Senate is on a privileged resolution, meaning that there has to be a pending arms sale. There is not currently a pending arms sale, but the next moment that there is a pending arms sale, if the policy has not changed, you can guarantee that there will be a vote in the Senate, and I think we will win that vote because Republicans and Democrats, because of the campaign that myself and many others and many other groups have lodged to raise awareness about the humanitarian catastrophe that exists in Yemen right now, have changed minds. I think there are likely more than 50 votes today to cut off arms sales, at least temporarily, to the Saudis until they change their behavior inside Yemen. So when the opportunity arises, you can absolutely be certain that I will do that. And by the way, my objection to this war in Yemen is not just because of the humanitarian price that Yemenis are paying, it's also because it's contrary to U.S. national security. Inside Yemen is the most lethal arm of Al-Qaeda, AQAP. Inside Yemen is a growing ISIS contingent. And we are making those groups stronger by continuing to feed and fuel that civil war. And so if you are serious about taking on extremism, as this administration says it is, then you should not be involved in a civil war that is making these extremist groups stronger.
Hi, Senator. John Clasby from Wilton, Connecticut. I had another point, but you mentioned something. I just wanted to follow up on it. Which side did you say the Iranians were on in the Yemen conflict?
Iranians are on the opposite side of the Saudis, as you imagine. They are funding the Houthis, the Houthi side.
Which you're against?
Well, I mean, it's not that I'm for or against either side. I just don't think that the United States should be funding a bombing campaign that is killing civilians.
The previous administration, which you probably supported pretty strongly, sent several pallet loads of cash to the Iranian regime. I think it was like $1.7 billion. And now you just brought up, and I wasn't going to talk about this, but you brought up Iran, that they're involved somehow in Yemen, and it may not be in our best interest to be dealing with that. Now, I understand the Middle East is a pretty complex place, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but you know, you gotta pick sides. So it's uncomfortable and it's difficult, but you gotta choose sides. So I'll leave it at that. But it sounds like maybe you supported our administration giving money to Iran, and now you're upset that Iran is in Yemen doing some bad things. It's very difficult, but you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, it's a complicated place. The question is not. First of all, I mean, there is a question as to whether you need to choose sides, right? Sometimes your national.
If you send plane loads of cash to Iran, you're choosing a side.
Hold on. Let me answer the question, right? So the Middle East is a very complicated place, right? So there have been times where we have been aligned with the Iranians, as we have been historically.
Not since 1979 or 78.
I will gladly.
Let me stop. I apologize for bringing up Iran because.
Let me answer your question and then get to other people's questions. So if you let me finish my sentence, there have been times that we have been aligned with Iran in the region, as we have been for the last 13 years in Iraq, where we are fighting on the same side as the Iranians, where we have U.S.-funded forces fighting side by side with Iranian militias. Then there are other places where we are clearly on the other side of the Iranians, whether it be inside Syria or whether it be, as we are presently constituted, in Yemen. And so we have historically, under Republican and Democratic administrations, not chosen sides. We have looked at our national security interests on a case-by-case basis, and we have sometimes lined up with the Iranians against the Sunni-based forces. We've sometimes lined up the other way. And so I just point that out as this is not a partisan or political question. That is historically how we have aligned ourselves in the region, based upon individual national security interests, not based on a singular belief that you have to be lined up with the Saudis all the time or lined up with the Iranians all the time.
All right, I'm stepping away. I'm stepping away, and I just wanted to make my original point that I was a 50-year Democrat.
That's right.
50-year Democrat, and I've changed to the Republican Party.
Hey.
Folks, I apologize.
Hey, no.
We're going to get through it.
Go ahead. We want to keep you short. Go ahead.
And 50-year Democrat, I've changed to the Republican Party because I have been very unhappy with how things are going, but I appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I'm going to try to do two questions, and I'll answer them both. So go there and then back there. Go ahead.
Hi, Senator Murphy. Diane Serapina from Stanford. Back to the tax bill. What can Connecticut constituents do to influence some of these Republican senators like Susan Collins, John McCain, others who could be influenced? Would they respond if folks from other states actually contact them with these messages? And also I wanted you to address the Johnson Amendment, the repeal of the Johnson Amendment, if that's included in the bill, which would allow nonprofits, tax-exempt organizations to endorse candidates and fund their candidacy.
Right, okay, we'll go here. Thanks, Dan.
Yes, Senator, thank you. I'm Deirdre Doran from Weston. I have been spending the last week contacting people, saying please contact others in other states, especially to reach out to their reps. Not that I don't think they should also reach out to their senators, but because there's been a more fractious debate in the House. And the House will be, of course, standing for re-election every single seat. I'm getting some blowback from some people. In fact, I'm going to meet them for drinks later, and I want to know what to tell them. First of all, I had one comment, which was, oh, well, we're going to take the House in the fall, so we don't have to worry about the tax bill. And it's because we'll just reverse everything. Now, I don't know how to explain anything here. So I'd like to be able to share an insight that you can share. You say permanent. I don't know what that means exactly. I'm not an accountant. I'm doing my best to be educated. So that's a portion of my question. The other is, will the Republican House members be as fractious, possibly? In your opinion, I went to see Jim Himes recently, and he made a comment that there is every possibility that there will be enough disagreement. Now, we can't know, but that's just a general question. Thank you.
So the questions are kind of linked. What do you do? I think the idea is that to the extent that you have the ability to organize calls and letters into members' offices that voted for this, and you can sort of look very quickly to see what members of Congress in New York did vote for this. We know that Susan Collins in Maine voted for it. I think that's important. Will they answer your calls or your letters? No, they're not going to pay much attention to calls and letters that come from outside their state, but it doesn't hurt, right? I mean, we want the phone lines of these offices to be jammed, to be ringing off the hook. And that is most useful if it's coming in-state, but it is not totally useless if it's coming from out of state as well. That's the volume that really matters. No, nobody should believe that this bill is going to be reversed. It is difficult to take back the House of Representatives. It is even more difficult to win back the United States Senate. That may happen in 2018, but it may not happen. And so nobody should just rely on ultimately Congress changing and the law changing. Remember, when Democrats took back control of the House and the Senate in 2016, 2006, they didn't immediately reverse the 2001-2003 tax cuts. So don't assume that even if it happens, that there are enough votes in the Democratic side to reverse all the damage that's been done. So don't let anybody say that you just can wait till an election.
Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm from Norwalk, and my question goes along the lines of the answer that you gave. Democrats have basically, I'm going to use a sports term, been on the defense right now. Republicans have the ball. They're doing a great job on the defensive end. When you get the ball back, what plans are being made to attack the basket, to go after some of these policies that have come into place, whether it be through legislation, whether it be through EOs, or whether it's been through appointments of cabinets, or talk about net neutrality, but especially in the tax bill. This goes through what plans are being made right now to reverse this as quickly as possible, as well as some of the other things that have gone through in the last year.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Joanna Swamley from Greenwich. I just want to point out all of the people wearing stickers that say Kill the Bill today. And the reason I pointed out is because you like calls. Can we log, I don't know, several hundred calls today for Kill the Bill?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, yes, you're doing right. No. Presence, and listen, presence is more important than calls. So presence is more important.
But I did have one quick question for you, and that was, the Democrats have been promising to kind of protect the Dreamers in connection with the continuing resolution, and I'm asking whether you would take the Dreamer Pledge in connection with the continuing resolution that's coming up December 22nd and vote to include it only if it includes the DREAM Act, and if not, why not?
Sure. And by the way, back to Diane on the question of the Johnson Amendment, let me get back to you on that. I don't remember which version that ended up in. So yes, I will not say that there are detailed discussions happening in Democratic circles as to what our legislative agenda will be in 2019 if we win back the House and the Senate. I think that would be getting a little ahead of ourselves, and we do have to spend so much of our time right now on defense. But let me just give you my very quick pitch about where we should be. And I'm not talking about where we should be as a party, but where we should be as a country. I think we need to be thinking about big fundamental reforms to our economy. And I think if I have a criticism of my party, it's that we have been addicted to incremental change. Part of what drove Bernie Sanders' candidacy was that he understood that people needed some big solutions to very big problems in their lives. And so we shouldn't shy away from talking about big ideas like dramatically reforming the commitment that we make to people when it comes to public education, right? Like a 12th grade education. A 12th grade education does not get you what you need in this country in the way that it did 50 years ago. 50 years ago, we said, we're going to get you enough education to be able to survive globally, to be able to make enough money, to pay your bills, to save for retirement, to put your kid through college. A 12th grade education doesn't get you there any longer. A 14th grade or a 16th grade education does. We should fundamentally reshift that commitment that we make to people on higher education. And so as a party, but I think as a country as well, if we do get control again, we need to be talking about those very big ideas. As to the Dreamers, listen, we need to solve this problem created by the president by the end of the year. Now, they have protected status up until March of next year. But we are much better off to use the leverage that we have now to get it done. Now, I have not been someone who's been out there saying, I'm going to shut down the government if the Dreamers aren't protected, because it shouldn't be a democratic ask. The fact of the matter is Republicans should care about these kids just as much as Democrats do. And the minute that Democrats say, we will shut down the government if we don't get this, it all of a sudden becomes a political football. And the fact of the matter is, for policy reasons and for political reasons, Republicans should be working just as hard as Democrats are to make sure that these millions of kids don't get sent back to foreign countries. Policy-wise, it is both the compassionate solution for these kids, but also the solution that makes sense economically, but politically, there'll be enormous damage to Republicans if they line up on the wrong side of this. So I'd be happy to take a look at that pledge, but I just think right now, we should be telling Republicans they should be working with us rather than drawing these lines in the sand, which in the end just put us at loggerheads in a way that we shouldn't be on an issue that should unite the country.
Good afternoon, Senator. Thank you so much for coming here this afternoon. My name is Farhan. I live in Norwalk, and I'm the chairperson of the Connecticut chapter of the American Islamic American Relations. There's so many problems with this tax legislation, it's hard to know where to begin, and I'm sure you can quite call it tax reform, because tax reform is going to be what's going to be needed in 2027 when we try to undo all the damage that's been done through this legislation. Now, as someone who grew up in Canada, I probably have a little bit more tolerance for taxes than your average American. But, we've made choices in this country, choices not to have universal health care, choices not to invest in our infrastructure, choices to spend trillions and trillions of dollars on pointless Middle Eastern wars, including the one that we're funding in Yemen. And just for a moment for people to understand, there are 50,000 Yemeni children who are dying this year as a result of this war. Can you imagine, 50,000 children dying in Connecticut? That's really what's at stake here. It's not about supporting Saudi Arabia or Iran or whoever. It's about stopping the death of children, and we're playing a direct part on that. So I guess my question for you, Senator, is, we can obviously protest against the Republicans trying to pass this bill, and maybe they will. But how are we going to enact an agenda that's more in keeping with our values once the House and the Senate are back in Democratic hands, and a couple of years from now, hopefully, when the presidency is out of Donald Trump's hands?
Marianne Segerman, Westport. Just briefly, I go to events that the senior senator who has a reputation of showing up at a lot of places. Every year, it used to be, oh no, not him again, but this year he was completely nonplussed by how warm and welcoming his reception was. I just want to put that out there. It's not just you. We're thrilled. My question is, there's a little snuck in there, personhood for fetus in this tax bill. Is it possible that that can be, a judge can say, a federal judge can say that that is just absurd in light of Roe v. Wade and get the whole thing thrown out?
That's not in the Senate version of the bill. Again, I haven't paid as close attention to the House version of the bill. I think that there was some provision that they were talking about related to putting away money for 529s, during pregnancy, and I don't know if that ended up in the House bill or not, but it's not in the Senate bill. And yes, I'm fully aware that Dick Blumenthal gets just as big as applause as I do, so I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it.
He never used to.
So, let's say that. So yeah, listen. So I think let me just because it's a little bit of the same question I got before, but let me give you a little different angle on this. So if we were to get back control of the House and the Senate, I will just say this: there is going to be a justifiable temptation to do with our power exactly what they did with theirs, to negotiate our legislation behind closed doors, to only talk to Democrats, to not try to reach out and build consensus. And again, it is way too early to predict what the world looks like or what the priorities would be if that were to happen. But I am not interested in the long run in existing in a Congress that is this dysfunctional and this partisan. At some point, we're going to have to make an effort to live together and to negotiate together and to legislate together. And I guess I'm going to bring all my values to the table in any form that I get to serve, whether I'm in the majority or the minority. But if we just engage in tit for tat, use reconciliation like Republicans are using reconciliation, I don't know that the country is stronger for that. It just makes these elections even more high stakes. It just means that policy flips back and forth like it is today forever. And we just have to have I'm in a room of folks who feel passionately as I do about these subjects, but we're all going to have a conversation about how we build the long-term health of our democracy, which is probably not in just using every lever of power that is available to you for your agenda whenever you get it. It's a tougher conversation. We'll keep the lines where they are here, and I'll try to get through as many of these as I can. So we'll go there. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Vicki Volper. I'm from Westport, and I'm a lawyer practicing primarily divorce mediation. And it's come to my attention that the House bill includes a provision that eliminates the tax deduction for alimony paid. That is going to be a disaster for women who are the primary recipients of alimony, because in most states, including Connecticut, there are no alimony guidelines. It's negotiated on a case-by-case basis, and men are going to be less generous in their alimony payments if they cannot have a tax deduction for this. My question is whether that is in the Senate bill, because that was not clear, and if this bill does pass, what is the likelihood of a provision like that being included in the bill?
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Vicki Coble, and I'm from Stamford. And I want to thank you for everything you're doing. I also want to tell everyone here, if you aren't on a website called 5 Calls, it's a really, really wonderful way to easily get the names and numbers of all our representatives and call them on important issues. But the thing I wanted to ask you is, everybody's mentioning that we're going to take over the House and the Senate in 2018, and I just don't feel confident that we're going to. We thought we were going to have the presidency this last year, and we don't. What are we doing as Democrats to actually craft a message that resonates with the constituency?
Let me double check on that provision. Just remember, this bill is about 8 inches thick. We were handed it an hour before we voted, late on a Friday night, now about a week ago. I will admit that I have not gotten through every single provision of that piece of legislation, and I'm pretty sure there's not a single one of my Republican colleagues who got through every single provision of that legislation before they voted on it. We were reading it as the debate was happening, and as you might have heard, we read enough to find a couple just absolutely terrible giveaways in the bill. There was this one provision which gave a tax benefit to one college in Pennsylvania that was primarily funded by Republican donors like the DeVos family. We caught it just in time to be able to scribble out an amendment to take that provision out of the bill. And 3 Republicans voted with us, meaning that we got 51 votes and that provision is gone. But there are a million other terrible provisions that we didn't notice and didn't get to that night. So I will double back on that. I'm not going to give you a full answer on what the Democrats need to do, because this is actually not a political event, official event, and I really shouldn't be sort of talking in explicit terms about Democratic strategy here. All I can tell you is that, as some of you know, I walk across the state every summer. I take about a week and I walk from the Rhode Island border to the New York border, and it serves as this amazing focus group. You know, I talk to hundreds of voters every single day, and most of them, 9 out of 10 of them, would never come to an event like this. They are not plugged in the way that you're plugged in, but they care deeply. And what you learn when you do that is that those voters are not talking about Russia. They're not talking about Steve Bannon. You know, they are not talking about the stuff that's on the cable news networks at night. They are talking about evergreen economic issues. They are talking about wages. They're talking about retirement. They're talking about taxes. They're talking about the quality of schools. And my advice to my party, which would be my advice to, again, everybody, is that that's where you need to be focused. That as a party, we get focused on a lot of non-economic issues. We spend a lot of time talking about the recklessness of Donald Trump because it feels really important. And we need to remember that that's not where everybody's heads are. They want economic solutions to the problems. They don't want incremental solutions. They want big, life-changing solutions. Because incremental change won't work for them. So I just hope that as we think about where we're going to go as a party, and this will be the only thing I'll say about it, that we're focused on where voters are. And voters are on economics, primarily. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't focus on all the other stuff, but that's where most voters' heads are.
Warren Bratter from Costco. I've been a university professor for 45 years, and it seems to me and my colleagues that information and higher learning are as important commodities as coal and oil. This bill seems to be directly attacking in a way that university life has never been attacked, and I'm particularly interested in the issue regarding tuition waivers for doctoral students, graduate students, and employees. Thank you very much.
I'm Trish Dion from Stanford, and I thank you especially for being here on the Sandy Hook anniversary day that you are helping all of us with that tragedy. But what I'm concerned about this bill is that it seems like it's the ultra-conservative win for knocking out government services and government regulations. And I do think people, yes, we're all concerned about the economy, but people really are concerned about continuing like the CHIP program, the Medicare and Medicaid. And I think people aren't realizing that their elders are going to be kicked out of nursing homes. Things like that are going to be happening across our country, and maybe more attention needs to be paid with what we're going to lose from this tax bill.
I just wish that my Republican friends, accurately remembered the foundation of American economic strength. The foundation of American economic strength is this really unique marriage that we created between public investment and private ingenuity. So we made these massive investments for any other country in the let me see if this is something up. Sorry, guys. So anyway, we made these big investments in this country before any other industrialized nation did in infrastructure and in education and in science. And then we asked the private sector to build jobs on top of that. That's how this country grew. The interstate highway system, DARPA, NIH, public education. And we should remember that public investment is not an economic weakness, it's a fundamental economic strength. And yes, if you were driving up $2 trillion worth of deficit, you're going to create an imperative to cut the very investments that actually power the economy. And of course, at the heart of American greatness is this commitment that we have historically made to education. We made a bigger, bolder commitment to education than any other nation did in the 20th century, and it paid off. So just pay attention to these really impactful changes in tax law that the Republicans have baked into these bills. The House bill takes away the ability of college students to write off their free tuition that they get as graduate students. It takes away your ability to deduct your interest on your student loan. And both bills take away the ability for colleges to avoid paying taxes on endowments. So endowments are now going to be taxed, which, and by the way, that's what that little provision was. It was exempting this one college in Pennsylvania funded by the DeVos family from the endowment tax. And so you are going to have colleges are going to be less able to raise money because of this tax, and you're going to have students less willing to take a chance, especially on a graduate degree, if they are going to all of a sudden be taxed on the tuition waiver that they get. There is no way that that accrues to the benefit of our economy, no matter what tax rate corporations are paying.
Hi, my name is Bob Chesson. I'm a pediatrician. I live in Fairfield. I practice in Bridgeport, and I take care of kids from all over the greater Bridgeport area. We got a notification last week from the state that as of January 1, all of the CHIP funding to the state is going to be canceled. That affects Husky B, which is children from families that are a little bit over the poverty line. We have over 500 families in our practice that are going to be losing all their insurance as of the first of the year. So we are terrified of what's going to happen to our families, and we're really concerned about what are the chances of people getting together and trying to get this CHIP thing passed by the end of the year.
Great, thanks.
Hi, Senator Murphy. My name's Mickey Herbst. I'm from Westport. So the New York Times today, I think it was today or yesterday, had a big article about the taxes and the lack of deductibility of state and local taxes. And I did a little search, and I found that while New York, Connecticut, California are high-tax, Massachusetts are high-tax states, there are plenty of high-tax states in this country. Just about everybody pays property taxes for local schools and education. And states like Maine, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, states all over. There's only 5 states in the country that do not have a state income tax. And all the others have rates varying from 3 to 13%. So the idea that this whole argument has been framed that this is a blue state, red state kind of thing, maybe isn't the argument we should be making. There's a lot of damage that can go around in states with Republican senators, Republican congressmen, and I think we've made a mistake in framing it just as kind of blue-red. So I think there's a wider constituency that could be damaged, reached, and maybe make some noise where it would matter.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you, and I think there's something to that. Clearly, as I mentioned, you know, there are millions of taxpayers who are going to get a tax increase all over the country. That $10,000 exclusion does tend to mean that some of those, you know, Midwestern states that still do have state and local taxes, but at a lower level than us, get a lot of that taken away by the $10,000 exclusion. And also, there tends to be just a much lower number of people who end up itemizing. Remember, this only matters if you itemize. So even if you're paying local and state taxes, if you don't choose to itemize, it doesn't affect you. And if you look at kind of Connecticut versus Iowa on itemized versus non-itemized, it does tend to be very different for states like ours. So I hear you on that, and I think there's some truth to it. And then just remind me the topic of your CHIP. Oh yeah, CHIP. So yeah, there is a bipartisan bill to extend the CHIP program. It's sitting out there for Congress to act on. I find it very hard to imagine that we're going to go home for Christmas without reauthorizing the CHIP program. But the Republican majority right now does not have a plan for how to bring that up. But there is a bipartisan deal that's been worked out between Ron Wyden and Orrin Hatch to reauthorize the CHIP program. I think, again, what Republicans are trying to do is say, well, you know, that's a Democratic issue, and so if we do that, then you have to do something for us in the budget, right? You got to give us one of our environmental riders that we want. And again, we're trying to say, no, CHIP has never been a partisan issue. This has never been something that Democrats owned or had to trade something for with Republicans. It's always been a bipartisan commitment, and that's one of the really most frustrating parts of this moment. These issues that used to be bipartisan, now we're being told by Republicans that they're just Democratic priorities.
James Mitchell from beautiful Norwalk. I'm personally very concerned about separation of church and state issues. That's my main #1 focus right now. And I was wondering if there's anything in this bill, thank you, if there's anything in this bill that specifically underfunds or unfunds any of the controls that prevent dark money from going through churches to be used for political gains, for bully pulpiting.
Hi, I'm Roz McCarthy and I'm from Norwalk, and I just want to speak a moment about affordable housing, because in the House version of the bill, they take away the tax exemption for private activity bonds, which helps fund low-income housing and affordable housing here in Connecticut. And I'm just wondering how aware the Senate is, and how can we keep that from being in any kind of final version of the bill?
Yeah. So again, this is, to the extent that there is any simplification of the tax code, and what we generally mean by simplification is taking away tax exemptions or deductions or credits, it only accrues to the detriment of middle class and poor people. So the carried interest loophole, which allows for very wealthy fund managers to take their income as capital gains rather than as ordinary income, that remains. But the tax exceptions or preferences for things like affordable housing or for tuition or to defray income and state income and property taxes, those are taken away. So we are very aware of the assault on housing in this bill. And again, right now, as Democrats, we don't have a lot of say in the negotiations, but we've been raising holy heck wherever we can about it. On this question, Diane Serapino raised this earlier, the question of the Johnson Amendment, which would weaken the IRS protections against political speech by religious groups. I just have to go back and check to see if that is in the Senate version of the bill. I don't have that off the top of my head, so that'll be one of the things I can double back with people on. And if you just leave your information with staff, I'll get the answer back to you. So.
Hi, Mike Ederer. I think somebody brought it up very briefly before, but I wanted to ask you about the FCC net neutrality vote that's occurring this week. I support net neutrality. I don't want to roll that.
Okay, great.
I was going to ask about that as well, but I want to say I'm here with Indivisible to Kill the Bill, and I'm very concerned about this bill, and I'm very concerned about what I'm seeing around me and heard here today is this general complacency that we're going to take back the Congress, and so this doesn't really matter, and we can sit it out until we do that. And so I'd like every congressman to do more publicity about the fact that that's not such an easy strategy to implement, that sitting it out and saying none of this is going to matter is not really a legitimate strategy. And I'd also like to say to everyone in the audience that we need to work together, and just complaining alone isn't enough, so I welcome you to join Indivisible and work in unison rather than as isolated individuals. My question was going to be about the internet, so I would like to hear your comments on
Yeah,
it.
so this is an incredibly concerning vote that's about to happen. We worry that it's rigged for success for the opponents of net neutrality. This is a complicated issue, and so it takes a little while to sort of get read into how the FCC and how Congress regulates the internet. But there are very few more important topics out there, because right now we all take for granted the fact that when we flip on the internet, we get the same speed access to the big content providers, the NBCs and the Netflixes, as we do to the local blogger who's just talking about what's happening down at City Hall. That will all change if net neutrality is revoked. The big content providers, which increasingly control content and distribution of that content, will cut deals in order to get faster access. And everybody that doesn't have that kind of purchasing or negotiating or political power will get slower access. And this can play out in a myriad of ways, but they're all bad. They all result in a small group of sort of mega media conglomerates being able to get stuff to you in a way that startups, in a way that independent content producers cannot. And that's why we've always protected the idea of the internet as a public utility that's open to everybody. And the problem is Congress has not taken control of this and updated our statutes, so the existing statutes are really murky as to sort of what is protected and what isn't, which gives the ability for the FCC to come in and sort of say, the current statutes guarantee net neutrality, or the current statutes allow for the kind of manipulation that I'm talking about. The Obama FCC basically protected net neutrality, and it looks as if we're going to take a huge step backwards. Congress ultimately has to step in and guarantee the content neutrality of the internet. That is, by the way, not going to happen until we get a new Congress. To your question, which is that yes, no, you cannot. It's sort of funny. When I started out doing town halls at the beginning of this year, we almost had the opposite problem. People were so fired up about political action, about advocacy, and they weren't as focused on elections. And so I had to sort of say, I said, hey, listen, you can argue against the Trump administration all you want, but you eventually have to win elections. Now it sounds that there's a worry that people are so focused on elections, they're not as focused on advocacy. You got to do both. In part because even if Democrats win the popular vote for the House of Representatives by 5 points in 2018, they won't have won back control of the House of Representatives, because the districts are drawn in a way that you have to win the national popular vote for the House of Representatives by 7 points in order to flip control of the House of Representatives. That's a really hard thing to do. Wave elections are like 3 or 4 points. You'd have to have a super wave election in order to change control. So you got to do, if you care about these things, you have to do both advocacy and elections.
Hello, Senator. My name is Harold Hilla. I'm from Riverside, and I am a happy member of Indivisible, happy in the sense that we can do something, we're active. My question is on the foreign policy side. I think all of us citizens need to be terribly concerned about the president and his war-making powers. So my question is, how can we and how can you attempt to apply checks and balances so that this president doesn't think that he can just sort of turn on a war or turn and that sort of thing?
Great.
I'm Alyssa Matuska. I live in Norwalk, and I don't feel like it was fair that you guys only had an hour to review 8 inches of the bill. And I wonder if there's something you can do so that way you can effectively do your job, because that can't happen. There's no way you could read that. There's no way you could do your job. And that's really unfair. What can be done so that it doesn't happen that way?
Sure, okay. Great questions. You can always change the rules in order to stop that from happening. Technically, why this happened is because the bill was introduced as an amendment. It was an amendment that struck the entire underlying bill and substituted with a new bill. And there is technically not a requirement that an amendment has to be out there for a certain period of time, in part because amendments sometimes are just a couple word changes, and so you don't need 3 days to review it. In the House of Representatives, they complained, remember, the Republicans complained incessantly about Obamacare being rammed through the process, despite the fact that it was out there for a year and a half. There was a month worth of debate in the United States Senate. They instituted a rule in the House of Representatives that said that a bill has to be viewable for 72 hours before you vote on it. Now, they regularly waive that rule in the House of Representatives, but the Senate should have some similar rule that if you're doing a major piece of legislation or an amendment that fundamentally rewrites a piece of legislation, it should have to sit out there for a certain number of hours, right? A certain number of days before you vote on it. And that's something that we should be talking about, that may be a reform that is needed. Again, probably wouldn't happen until a different party is in charge. On war powers, I'd say two things about that. One, Congress has fundamentally abdicated its co-equal responsibility on foreign policy, and there's no better example of that than the unauthorized war that's happening against ISIS today. I want to beat ISIS, right? I support military engagement to take out this enemy of the United States, but it shouldn't happen without congressional authorization, and there is no way that President Obama should have interpreted the old 2001 war authorization to cover ISIS. And I have been arguing since I got to the Senate to pass, or since we started fighting ISIS, to pass an authorization of military force against ISIS. By not doing that, you are telegraphing to the Trump administration, as we previously telegraphed to the Obama administration, that Congress isn't really interested in checking presidential war-making authority, that we all support the war against ISIS, even though it has no authorization. And so it starts to make the executive think that they don't need to come to Congress for future authorizations. So as the president is thinking about what to do in North Korea, and he watches Congress be silent on the war that is currently ongoing against ISIS, he starts to think, maybe I don't need an authorization for a war against North Korea, which is my second point. I've introduced legislation that would make clear what I think existing law already says, but let's say it again, that the president does not have the constitutional power to take preemptive military action against North Korea. If there's an attack against the United States or an imminent threat of attack against the United States, the president does have Article 2 power to strike. But in the absence of an attack or an imminent attack, he does not have the ability to take military action. I've introduced that legislation. I'm hopeful that Congress will vote on it. Again, I think it just restates existing law, but we need to do that because I worry, as I know you worry, that this president is going to miscalculate his way into war on the Korean Peninsula that could get millions of people killed.
Diane Keefe from Norwalk. Hello, Chris. Thank you for your leadership on many, many issues. My question is, your presentation suggested that there was $500 billion of cuts to Medicare and then $1 trillion of cuts to Medicaid that would be somewhat automatic in response to this bill getting passed, and I hope you can clarify that.
Clarify that.
And my ancillary question is, that to me relates to the priorities that the legislative branch is supposed to have between guns and butter, between military and non-military spending, health being a big part of that. So could you clarify how that foots with our $600 billion military?
Thank you for that. I don't think Diane's question was planted because but I actually got that wrong. I think when I was reading it off of the slide, there's an important distinction here. What the slide was talking about is the budget that the Republicans passed earlier this year. Now, a budget, contrary to how you would think about a budget, is non-binding. It basically gives you the framework for your appropriations bills, your spending bills. That budget called for those massive cuts in the neighborhood of $1 trillion in Medicaid and $400-something billion in Medicare. But that is a non-binding document. The automatic cuts are different. The automatic cuts happen when you deficit finance an obligation. And because we've deficit financed by $1.5 trillion this tax cut, there will be automatic cuts that are imposed to Medicare and discretionary programs. There will be a maximum 4% cut to Medicare, but a 4% cut to Medicare when Medicare is growing on average at a rate of 5 or 6% a year is a massive cut to Medicare. And then even deeper cuts to other discretionary programs, including the Department of Defense. So those cuts could be upwards of 10 to 15%. Now, what Congress normally does is we waive that requirement. It's an old statute that says when you deficit finance and you don't pay for it, we will just make automatic cuts in Medicare and discretionary programs. So at some point, what we believe is that the Republicans are going to put on the table a motion to waive that requirement for automatic cuts. And it will be an interesting question for Democrats. Obviously, we don't want those cuts to go into effect. And yet you would have this bizarre set of votes in which Republicans would deliver all the votes for the tax cut, and Democrats would deliver all the votes for the waiver of the rule that pays for the tax cuts. And so that motion has not been made. Democrats haven't announced what they're going to do on it. But I'm glad I got the chance to do a little bit better job of explaining this. Okay, so we are we're out of time here because I got to get to a bunch more events today. But let me just encourage you to continue to raise your voice in every way possible. Obviously, doing it through Indivisible and other groups is super effective. Think about ways in which you can influence the votes of members in other states. And then just never stop contacting my office. By the way, it is never fruitless to contact me, even if you agree with me. Because remember, often the people that call the office are the people who disagree with me. And then when the newspapers call and say, well, how many people called in opposition to the tax bill or in support of the tax bill? If the people who agree with me don't contact me, then it looks like I'm getting a sample of my constituents that's not representative. Plus, it just buoys our spirits in the office to be getting calls from our friends. So have a great holiday, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out.